Hi, and welcome back to Beyond the Monsters. Today I have Paul Hutchinson here, and I can't even tell you what an honor this is, Paul, because, we've been wanting to expose a lot of the things that are going on as far as human trafficking, child trafficking. And Paul just happens to be the executive producer of The Sound of Freedom. I'm sure most people have seen it. If they haven't, I don't know, they're under a rock or something out there because I think we've all seen it and we've all been touched by it. And I just wanted to give you just this little tiny introduction and let you go from there.
Well, thank you, Shell.
You're
Incredibly
welcome.
grateful to be here with you and with your audience today. And
Mm.
in fact, the Sound of Freedom book literally launched just this week. So two years ago, the movie became the number one independent film in the world, and
Mm.
literally hundreds of millions of children are safer now because of that awareness.
Right.
But a lot of parents are like, okay, they'll leave the movie. They'll like, okay, I want to do something. I want to go help rescue kids. Yeah, the worst thing you can do is go to Mexico and try to go undercover. You're going to get arrested. You're probably going to
Right.
get shot. The
Right.
best thing you can do is go home and hug your children and create a healthy environment there. And I give parents the tools they need to keep their kids safe, the situational awareness and reading a room and understanding the signs of a child that might be in a situation where they're being groomed, et cetera. These are all things that we as parents can be aware of
Right.
and can keep our kids safe. And so I'm excited to share the story of bringing that global movement to the world. I led or played a key part in over 70 undercover child rescue missions in 15 countries over a period of 10 years. And I've seen the darkest part of humanity. There's nothing that compares to the darkness of seeing an 8-year-old being
Mm.
sold. And
Right.
and I've also seen the light, the beautiful light of the rehabilitation and reuniting of kids with their families. And more important than that, I clearly understand what needs to happen for humanity to break free of the toxicity that is creating things like child trafficking. So I'm excited to
Right.
share all of that with you and your audience
Yes.
today.
Can't wait.
So,
So you go ahead and you dive in, at whatever point you'd like to. I mean, I just feel blessed that you're here so we can share all this with our listeners and the people that are watching. It's something that we've really wanted to touch on, and here you are. Like, so let's go.
well, some high level stuff I think everybody needs to be aware of.
Mhm.
Number one, um, human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. And good people don't know that it's even happening. At least they didn't before the Sound of Freedom.
Right.
And children in that kind of abuse, that trafficking being sold, there's over 10 million of them today. However, that's a tiny number compared to the real problem. And the real problem is this: literally, one in every four women that you know, that I know, one in every four women in the United States were a victim of sexual abuse as a
Mm.
child. As a child. Now, that's just the ones who talk about it. I believe the
Right.
number is more than double that because the average age of somebody talking about that kind of darkness in their childhood, the average age is 52 years old. That's my age. I've got grandkids. I've,
Mhm.
lived my life. And if we're holding on to that so many years, what happens is it comes out. It comes out in anger, in low self-esteem, and anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions. All of this stuff is a result of unhealed wounds that so
Right.
many of us carry. Now, for men, it's a little bit less. It's one in every five men have been a victim of sexual abuse at some time in their life. But even them, one in every four of them, it was under the age of 10 years old in their own homes. And
Right.
so, literally speaking, I don't care if somebody's living in an apartment complex or an affluent neighborhood, if you walked out in your front porch, out of your front door, and you looked left and you looked right, there's a very high chance that one of those homes is a dangerous place for children because
Right.
of the statistics of how many kids go
Mhm.
through this. Now, we're going to talk today about what healing looks like, but I'm going to go into the darkness first because we can't dissipate the darkness, we can't eradicate the darkness until we recognize what it is. And
I
and
agree.
that's how we alchemize these things in our life as we bring them into the light. Once the
Mhm.
darkness is in the light, it dissipates completely. It's gone. And so it's
Right.
important that we bring these things into the light. And so, back up when I was in my teenage years, I was asked by our principal of our high school to lead something called the peer leadership team. And kids, if they go to a teacher with abuse situations at home or whatever, legally that teacher has to go to authority, et cetera. And so many kids, they don't feel comfortable
Right.
even talking to a teacher. So I was trained at a young age to be a peer counselor. And in that training, and then as a counselor, I realized the magnitude of this problem, of how many kids were dealing with anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions because of that unhealed trauma. And sadly, moving forward, I realized that over 70% of incarcerated felons speak about their challenges as a child, abuse as a child. Now, God bless everybody who's listening to us today who dealt with that kind of pain and became protectors. Most of my operators, when we led these undercover missions, most of my operators were abused as children. And the majority of people who go through that grow up to be protectors. There's no
Right.
way that that trauma is ever going to be passed on. But like I said, it does come out. It does come out in all of these behaviors of anger issues and addictions. Guys
Yes.
who were I had one of my operators was had a sexual addiction that was insatiable. He was abused at 8 years old by his uncle and literally spent his whole teenage and adult life trying to prove to himself that he wasn't gay by sleeping with every woman possible, right? And so
Right.
there's so many unhealed wounds, alcoholism and drug abuse
Mhm.
and everything, that a lot of that comes from that. Now, if not giving the love, the help, the healing that they need, 1/3 of those who were abused as children become contact offenders, meaning either
Yes.
verbally, physically, or in some cases, sexually abusing somebody
Mhm.
else. And so I found myself in all of these missions. I found myself wishing that I could have got to these kids before they were ever hurt in the first place.
Right.
I was
Right.
so mad. We literally I would be face to face with traffickers in downtown Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and downtown Mexico City, in the most dangerous, darkest places on the planet, and seeing these children who were being abused 20, 30 times a day, thinking, how are they ever going to recover from this? I
Right.
wish that we had got here 5 years ago, 10 years ago, before this child ever got in this situation. And then I realized, though, that even then, if we pulled these kids out of that situation before it happened, if not enough was being done to fix the demand, then 20 more kids would be sucked back into the deepest recesses of hell
Right.
to fulfill that demand. And so, and don't get me wrong, listeners, on this next part. I I am not a sympathizer in any way of anyone who hurts a child. I've literally put my life in danger hundreds of times to
Yes.
ensure that innocence is preserved and that those kids are saved. However, I recognize that just pulling the kids out of hell wasn't going to fix the problem. We
Right.
need to pull the hell out of humanity to fix it. I realize that the majority of the traffickers were trafficked themselves as children.
Right.
The majority of the perpetrators were abused themselves as children. And so, if we're really going to eradicate child trafficking, it's not going to come with me and my operators doing 1,000 more undercover missions and pulling kids out of hell around the world. The only way we're going to fix this is by showing humanity the darkness, which we did with the Sound of Freedom, and saying, okay,
Right.
now I have your attention. Let's talk about this. Where's it coming from? What do we need to do to heal this so that we never have to have this conversation in the future? And so that's what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about what healing looks like. But first of all, I want to give some parents some tools that you can use, preventative tools. And you'll find these things in the Sound of Freedom book. You can get them at Amazon. There's so much information there. But I went through extensive training on Krav Maga, hand-to-hand combat training, weapons training. I have as they would say, a special set of skills that comes from a previous life that makes me somewhat safe in a dangerous place. However, the majority of the things that we used in those dangerous situations weren't what we call hard skills of martial arts, etc. The
Right.
majority of them was understanding situational awareness. In fact,
Mhm.
if you're ever to a point where you have to go to hard skills, punches and knives and whatever, if you're ever to that point, you have missed 95% of the opportunities to keep you and your family safe. Just by being able to read a room, by recognizing some of the little signs. There's
Mhm.
a book that I had a lot of my operators read called The Gift of Fear. And in that, it talks about how our subconscious mind is picking up on millions of little teeny cues everywhere. You might be walking into the restaurant and there's you're out of your peripheral. There was a guy that was standing in the alley that had a heavy coat on, and it was too heavy for that time of day. It was too warm, and was acting.
Right.
But your conscious mind was too focused on just getting in the door and talking to your friend on the phone or whatever. Your subconscious mind picked that up. Your subconscious mind picked up the reflection in the window of something going on behind you. So your subconscious mind speaks to you in ways that your conscious mind doesn't. And beyond that, your superconscious mind, your access to the connection with the energy of the universe and each other, is something where if we as parents start listening to that, it's going
Mhm.
to it's going to go a long ways in that situational awareness and keeping our kids safe. Also, you need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, "Hey, mom, I don't like it when you tell me to hug Uncle Harry because
Mhm.
he's been touching me weird and tries to go alone with me in places in the house, and now he says we should have sleepovers at his house, and I
Mhm.
just don't feel comfortable, or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother took pictures of us when we were changing, and now he says he's going to use them around the school unless I do things after school with him and his friends. Or I don't like this babysitter. She's showing us pornography and says we should trust her more than you. There's so many things that your relationship with your children and their ability to have you be their 911 is
Yes.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
can tell you too, Paul, we've had so many guests on that have been in those situations and have went to their parents and they didn't believe them or they just kind of brushed it off. So what you're saying as far as a relationship, the parent-child relationship, you're so right. It's so important because if they don't feel like they can come to you, then they're just going to keep it in or worse it's going to happen. It's going to get worse or they are going to go spend the night at uncle whoever's house and that's such a good point.
well, and the worst thing you can do as a parent in that situation is to discount what they were saying. That
Mhm.
causes as much or more trauma than the trauma itself. The person they love and trust saying, brushing it off or don't tell anybody because it might hurt the family's reputation. No, if your
Right.
child comes to you with something like that, there is a very, very, very high chance that
Yeah,
it really did happen. Children don't lie about stuff like that, not very
I
often
agree.
at all. And so,
Right.
yes, it's so important to understand that. And I've had I've had missions where I had one in Dominican Republic where the trafficker was an escaped convict from the US, and he had been selling kids for over a decade there. He had connected us with some other traffickers that were there, but the one that left a dark impression in my heart, in my soul, was when he connected me with a mother who was selling her own kids. And most of us as mothers and fathers are would give our lives for our kids.
Right.
Sadly, if addiction is involved, if their own trauma of their childhood, I mean, there's a million different things there. Um, this mother was not just renting her kids out; she was selling them to me for $10,000 each. And
Oh my
he
god.
put me on the phone with her, and she said, I need you to make me a promise. Now, she thought that we were taking the kids to Miami to be in a underage strip club, brothel thing there. And she said, I need you to make me a promise. And I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. This mother wants me to say, hey, make sure they're well fed and taken care of. I said, what promise do you need? She said, when you're done with them, if you're ever done with them, I need you to be done with them.
Ugh,
She said, I don't want this ever to come back on me. I don't want them ever to try to find me. If you're ever done prostituting they were 9 and 11.
oh god.
So I found myself seeing the darkest part of what happens when people allow their addictions. Um, she was really addicted to some really nasty drugs, and their greed,
Mhm.
their arrogance. I found myself in my very first rescue mission. I thought that traffickers would have earrings in their noses and tattoos down their necks. The first trafficker I met, if you guys have seen the movie Sound of Freedom, I'm my character is Pablo. Pablo is the wealthy business owner that halfway through Jim Caviezel's like, if I can convince Pablo, we can make this happen. And that was me in real life. He, a Homeland Security agent in Colombia, had found these children and needed somebody to help finance the mission and needed somebody to play the role of the wealthy buyer because this trafficker had a piece of property he wanted to develop into a child brothel resort type of a thing. And so that was me in real
Wow.
life. I end up going down and being face to face with these traffickers. And that was my first undercover mission. And the common
Wow.
thread with the traffickers, I thought that it would be, tattoos or dreadlocks or whatever. The common
Sure.
thread I realized was arrogance, greed, and lust.
Mhm.
And the first trafficker I met was a businessman. He was, clean shaven. He was, well spoken. The second I met was a beautiful woman. She ran a modeling agency, just like what you saw in the movie.
Right.
And she was pulling kids in from poor areas and duping their parents into thinking they were going to be a model. And this stuff was real. We took 8 different rescue missions and put them all together into that one storyline. But the moment that changed my life was I'm sitting on a chair, just like you and I are right now. The traffickers had brought 54 children to the island, and one of them brought out 4 virgins. He called them 0 kilometer miles,
Oh, geez.
talking about them like they're commodities, like they're a
Right.
car. And this one child, this 11-year-old, standing in front of me, she wasn't much taller than I was as I was sitting down, and she was standing up. And she had red hair. It was long braids halfway down her back. She had a kitty cat painted on her shirt, had a little cat face on it. And she had been crying her makeup. They had put makeup on this little 11-year-old, and her makeup was all smeared. And all I could see was fear. in her eyes. And I made a commitment at that moment to myself, to God, to that child, that I would dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. And that began my transformation,
That's when it
and
started.
that's when it started. It was a bunch of missions later. It was 2.5, 3 years later that I had done a bunch of missions, but I was doing a lot of good, but I was still broken myself. And
Okay.
I recognized that I was filled with arrogance and greed and lust. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was helping the children. But I was having parties at my house every other weekend with half dressed girls and NBA players. I was on my
Mhm.
second marriage headed for a divorce. I was thinking that happiness was going to come from one more party, one more girl,
Mhm.
one more. And I was super empty inside. And this is where my major transformation happened. We were blowing through our undercover operators. I had Green Berets with 300 missions in Afghanistan and Iraq and the Middle East, and they already had PTSD. And one undercover mission with me, and seeing a menu with children's faces on it and the amount of money that each performance of those kids would cost. And it would just wreck these Navy SEALs, Green Berets. They were having a hard time. And I had two operators. One, Jimmy Rex, he had done 13 missions with me, and one, Andrew McCubbins. Andrew had done 22 missions with me. They called me up on the phone together and they said, "Paul, do you trust us?" And I said, "Yeah, I trust you with my life, literally. On these missions, I'm in charge of talking, you're in charge of making sure I don't die." They said, "You
Right.
need to come to this healing retreat with us." I'm like, "I don't need to heal. I'm Paul F. and Hutchinson, right?"
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
said, "Everybody wants to be me. I can, get any
Right.
girl I want to. I can buy things and whatever, And this was my energy at the time. And they said, "No, you do need to heal. Your children don't talk to you. Your marriage is a disaster. Um, your relationship with your creator disappeared a long time ago. You may not be addicted to cocaine and heroin, but you're addicted to everything else you can think of, especially anything wearing a skirt." And that's
So they were calling you out.
they were, and I
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, I'll go." And this doctor they were working with had had traveled around the world in identifying different types of holistic healing modalities, and she was using she was she had specialized in the proper use, and this is so important, the proper use of psychedelics when it
Mhm.
comes to anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma. Now, what was interesting is they had told me this doctor could help people overcome these things in literally a few days. And I said, "Well, that's BS." I said, "Because my company that I built in my early 20s helped people overcome those things. We had 50,000 people a month calling in off of an infomercial to get help with anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma. This is not something you overcome in a few days. This is something that took us a minimum of 12 weeks with a personal
Right.
coach working 1 to 2 hours a day just to start changing those negative habit patterns of thought." Now, from a scientific standpoint, let me teach what worked here, because let me tell you my experience first. This was by far the most transformational experience of my life, bar none. And
Okay.
everything changed for me. It was the most beautiful, horrific experience of my life. Horrific because and this doctor was using not a microdose, but a ceremonial dose of psilocybin. And I thought that psilocybin was dangerous. That's a Schedule One drug. It
Mhm.
was, since the late '60s, it's been illegal to even have it in your pocket, right?
Right.
The truth is, Not it's not dangerous like cocaine. It's actually safer than table sugar. There's never been a case of addiction, not one. There's never been a case of overdose, not one. And when used properly with a trained facilitator, it creates a sense of what they call hyper neuroplasticity. So
Mhm.
when we're children, when we're 0 to 9 years old, 9, 10 years old, your brain is in this state of neuroplasticity. We're very, very impressionable. You can learn 3 or 4 languages at the same time that you're learning how to walk and
Right.
eat and all of these other things. And if
Mhm.
something happens in those formative years, if your uncle abuses you, or you're even something simple like your dad says, oh, you look fat in that dress, whatever it is, these things get imprinted into our subconscious mind, and 95% of our life is run by our subconscious mind. Now after 9 or 10 years old, to put something new in our subconscious, it's going to take at least 21 days to create a new habit. So but, you're driving down the street,
Right.
you've spent at least 21 days creating that new habit of knowing how to drive. Your subconscious mind is hitting the brake, hitting the gas. You're not having to think through that all the time. Well, if we have heavy things, it might take a lot longer than that 21 days, because that they're so deeply embedded in our subconscious mind. Well, the
Mhm.
psilocybin, and even some cases people use something like ayahuasca or ketamine or
Right.
wachuma. There's a lot of different ones that we can talk about. They they create this temporary state of neuroplasticity, hyper neuroplasticity, and used in the right environment with the right facilitator, you can create real permanent change in a very short period of time. And so
Mhm.
this is why I'm not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high with their friends on mushrooms. This is not only a bad idea,
Right.
it's dangerous, because you create that
Exactly.
hyper neuroplasticity, and you've got rap music going on over here. You've got somebody yelling at their wife over here. You've got an orgy going on over there. You're opening up that energy in a very dangerous place. And the
Mhm.
other thing that it does, especially with the psilocybin, it creates a energetic connection with everything and everyone in a really powerful way. And so for me, what happened, my horrific experience, which was transformational, is the that connection with everything I felt in every cell of my being. I felt the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom, as if I was them. And it was so heavy and it was so dark. And then I felt the joy of the children that we had helped to rescue as they were reuniting with their families, as if I was them. And it was so beautiful. And then I felt the pain of some guy was whose family broke apart because he was at my party and slept with a cheerleader and his wife left him. And then I felt the ripple effect of my actions, where maybe a year or 2 years from now, because they're in a broken family, the daughter ends up getting abused somehow by a stepdad, or maybe the son ends up on drugs. I mean, there's so many things that ripple effect of my actions, and it was completely transforming. I call it my ego death in that space, and so we became advocates of the proper use, and now I have hosted and facilitated over 80 guided meditation, plant medicine, healing retreat experiences for people
That's
that want to break
amazing.
free of everything that's holding them back. So you
Wow.
you you guys have centers that help people using different types of psychedelics as well, correct? With
Mhm.
like
Right.
ketamine. Ketamine is the one that's legal here in the U.S. when used
Yes.
with the right people. Sadly, big pharma and have
Always.
really high level controls on everything, and that the only reason why it's been legalized is the fact that it's synthetic, and they can
Mhm.
control it, they can make money from it. And you do have to be careful, because if it's just used recreationally, it is the one that can be addictive, right?
Right.
And so it's
Right.
so important that it's used in the right format, et cetera. And so, um, we now do 5 and 7 day, fully immersive, transformational healing experiences. In the beginning, we started out with just my undercover operators who, had dealing with all their PTSD, and then we started bringing in their wives who already were on anxiety depression medication because
Sure.
they were married to a Green Beret, right?
Right,
And
right.
then we started bringing in women who had dealt with severe trauma as a child,
Mhm.
and now we work with a lot of business leaders now today will come down. We tried to
Sign me
change the
up. I'll do it.
we tried to change the
Definitely.
laws here in the U.S. and I think that they will change. I've been friends with RFK for about 10 years, and he's agreed to he's going to come in and help change those laws
That
and
would be
decriminalize the use.
amazing. Just
But I
like
think
peptides worked for everyone and, they took those away too. It's like anything that's
yeah.
working.
Yeah, well, it's because
Yeah,
they want to keep us sick, they
right,
want to keep us
right.
controlled, and we have to recognize where those controls are coming from.
Yes,
You just follow the money, and you'll
right.
realize that wow, if you could get 10 and 20 years worth of therapy done in with something that you can grow in your backyard, well, that's going to cost them hundreds of billions of dollars. Why would they want to
Yes.
allow that to be legal?
Right, right. Wow, so you've held lots of these, that's amazing. So many people
Yeah.
ask all the time, like, where are these, retreats and who does them? So that's so good to know that you guys are doing that.
Well, it's
A lot of
important.
people wanna try it. They really
They do,
do.
and I'm telling you, it is more important to have the right facilitator when it comes to
Yes.
this than it's as important as picking the right brain surgeon if you've got a brain tumor, right?
I
You
agree.
you don't want to go over to your friend's house and say, "Hey, here's a scalpel. I've got a brain tumor. Let's fix this." No, that
Right.
doesn't work. And sadly, there are a lot of self-proclaimed shamans in the US and facilitators that are doing these journey experiences that aren't what I call setting sacred space. They don't have the right environment, the right uh, I'll just go through what ours looks like so that then your listener can find facilitators that do this. If you can learn more about ours by just going to liberatinghumanity.com.
Okay. And
Yeah,
we'll post all that too in the
yeah,
description of the
Liberating
podcast.
Humanity will give you tools to keep your kids safe, links to buy the book, and information on the proper use of these tools.
Okay.
So number one, when somebody comes to ours, one of our facilitators spends at least a half an hour on the phone with them about 2 weeks before they come in helping them get really clear on their intentions. Everything that
Okay.
you want to release and everything that you want to embrace. What is and when you want to release, it's everything from my anger issues, my addictions, the hatred I still have towards my grandfather because of this, whatever it is. These are all things that those chains are holding us back from being the
Mhm.
best person that we want to be. And
Right.
then everything we want to embrace is that 4.0, that 6.0 version of ourselves, and more confident, more present, more loving, all of these things. Because if you don't have clarity when you go into that state of neuroplasticity, if you don't have clarity about what the end result needs to look like, it's not going to fix anything. If you imagine that, let's say that somebody was laying a concrete freeway, right? They were laying cement on the freeway, and in the flowing state, that's the neuroplasticity. That's when we're 9, 10 years old or whatever else. But let's say that they forgot to flatten it out. They literally just poured the concrete and it's bumps, and you go through your life going over all these bumps, right? Well,
Right.
this is an opportunity to turn it back into a flow state, into a flowing concrete. And then you say, okay, now what I want this to be this flat. I want this to be a ramp going up, whatever it is. But you have to get clear on what you want before you go in. Then
Right.
coming into the experience, we the environment's super important. We have our sanctuary is a place in nature. Nature is a really important part of the puzzle when it comes to releasing things that are not in alignment with our highest and best self. And so the environment there is super valuable. We have people journal details about what they're there for. The diet is important as well. We have people stay away from fatty foods for at least a week usually 2 weeks, alcohol for a couple weeks. They have to be off of any of their SSRIs. If they're on anxiety, depression medication, you can't create the real long term change if it's kind of like if you have a deep wound and it's infected, but then you put a cast over the top of it.
Right.
You can't get down to the infection. You can't fix anything there. You've got to
Right.
remove that bandage over the top, get down and clean it
Get
out
to
from there. So
the root, yeah.
exactly. So the diet's important when we come into the experience. It's the music. You can't be you can't be listening to any of the lyrics or the wrong frequencies can affect that subconscious as well. And so we have curated um, playlists put together by Johns Hopkins University and some of the scientists there that help in that
Okay.
neuroplasticity state to be able to create the opportunity for the facilitators to get in there and help remove some of those traumas that you've been holding on your entire life. So,
Right.
and then from there, there's 180 different strains of psilocybin. All of them have a little bit different effect. People are like, oh, mushrooms is mushrooms. No, there's a lot of different ones that create a different experience. Our first part of the 5 days, that's all about release. So the different strains that we use are specific, and the music that we use is specifically designed to help people break down those addictions and those habits and release the attachments. We do a guided meditation even before we go onto the medicine. I teach tools for people to go home and meditate every day, and in that deep meditation state do something that we call it ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian term for um, uh, a cutting cords of forgiving, of releasing energies that don't belong to you. Basically, it's I'm sorry, I forgive you, I'm grateful, and I love you. But there's a whole bunch more to it that people can look up themselves and
Right.
learn how to release those things that don't belong to them. So again, the whether it's ketamine, whether it's psilocybin, whether it's ayahuasca, whether it's wachuma, any of these, it simply creates a window of opportunity in the subconscious mind to go in and do real deep healing work and break free from those things that aren't in alignment with the highest and best version of you. And the reason I spent so much time
Love
on this the last
this.
20 minutes is because I
Yeah.
truly believe that the answer to eradicating child trafficking starts with every single adult facing their own demons and saying, what do I need to change? Now, hopefully, nobody listening to us today would ever hurt a child. However, we all have to recognize the ripple effect of our actions. There's something
Yes.
I talk about this in the Sound of Freedom book. There's something that I call or first of all, just tension transfer. Tension transfer. Imagine you go to work and you're having a bad day, your finances are whatever it is, and you're out of integrity. You haven't dealt
Mhm.
with your own shit, and you yell at one of your employees. That employee goes home and he yells at his wife, and his wife yells at the son, and he comes home from school and the son kicks the dog, right? So
Yeah, just a
literally,
big ripple effect.
it is that
Yes.
the dog being kicked really came from you not being in integrity that day, right?
Right.
Now let's pretend like that what you didn't know is that guy at work that we yelled at, let's say that he was abused as a child and he never dealt with that abuse issue, and he held it inside, and a whole bunch of bad things happened to him, and he made a whole bunch of bad decisions throughout his life that led him down a dark road. Let's say he was addicted to pornography, and that addiction led to some harder and harder addictions, maybe, you know, um, more abuse videos on his addiction, and then maybe his addiction led him to something younger, a little bit younger. Pretty soon, he was fantasizing about something he wouldn't have even thought was attractive 5 years ago because of his unhealed trauma. And
Right.
let's say that he's also abusing alcohol. These are all things you didn't know, and his wife just left him. And let's say that this is the weekend that he gets his 12-year-old daughter and her cousin staying over. Now that tension transfer. didn't just end
Mm,
up with the kicking of the dog. Now that
right.
tension transfer came out on a child, right? And so we
Yeah.
all have to pay attention. I love the story of the man who's sitting on the couch and he's he's reading his newspaper. And his little boy comes in. He says, "Daddy, can we play baseball?" His daddy's like, "Oh, I'm busy right now." No, he's not. He's playing. He's reading the newspaper, right? And the little boy comes back a little bit later. He's like, "Daddy, Daddy, it's a beautiful day outside. Can we go play baseball, please?" His dad turns the page and he sees this map of the world. He has this idea. He tears out that page, and he tears out the map into little pieces of paper. He throws it on the floor. He says, "Son, you need to learn your geography. I want you to put the world together exactly how it's supposed to be. Every single country, every state, go get some tape and tape it all together. As soon as you put it together, I'll go play ball with you." He's thinking it's going to take a few hours for this little boy to do this. Well, like 5 minutes later, the little boy comes back and the world is perfectly put together. And the man says, "Well, how did you do that?" And the little boy turns it over. He says, "There was a picture of a man on the other side. I just put the man together and the whole world came together." And that's really the answer to the riddle. We sit here and try to
Yeah.
think, okay, do I create another Sound of Freedom movie that's going to help hundreds of millions of people? Do I? No, all of us simply need to look in the mirror. Do you realize that if you spent the next year in healing yourself, that's all you did is spend a year healing yourself, and then you spend that next year, let's say it took you an entire year to mentor two people to their own healing. And let's say that the next year those two people passed it on. The compounding effect of two people helping two people, it's literally only 33 years later, and it's the entire global population of over 8.5 billion people. So, yes,
Wow.
every one of us can change the world by
Right.
starting with that man on the couch, with that woman in the mirror.
Right.
That's who we need to
Right.
start with.
Taking responsibility for ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing. How did you come across, like, knowing all this stuff for healing and for the psilocybin, all those things? How were you introduced to that?
It was as I talked about earlier, in my teenage years, I was chosen to be the president of the peer leadership team. At 21 years old, I started a company. It was called Midwest Center Marketing. We did all the marketing for a lady by the name of Lucinda Bassett. She had the Attacking Anxiety and Depression program, and built that up to almost $70 million in sales. 50,000 people a month calling in off of an infomercial, created a coaching program, et cetera. And I personally, even though I was the owner of the company, I loved getting on the phone with the
Mhm.
people who were struggling and helping them see the light, and
Mhm.
selling them a personal coach. We had a 100% money back guarantee. If they hadn't overcome their anxiety and depression and PTSD within the course over a period of 3 to 6 months, we give them their money back. And we had a 97% success rate because we weren't using
Amazing.
drugs. We weren't using, you know, Prozac and Xanax. We were getting down to the roots of the problem and helping people change the negative habit patterns of thought, the worry, the what if thinking, the negative expectations, the perceptions we have of ourselves, our coping skills in dealing with stress. These are all things that come from things in our subconscious mind, usually
Right.
from our past, but they're driving our lives. And so that that's where that came from. I sold that company at 29 years old and started investing in real estate. Did pretty well in the real estate world.
Okay.
Um, and that's the money that I use um, to fund the Sound of Freedom. I was a primary investor in the movie, but as I was doing the undercover work, I retired completely from the real estate world and went into the darkness of the world in the rescue missions, and it was about 8 years ago when I was I was in that dark place in my life. I was helping kids, but I was unhappy in my marriage, unhappy in every area of my life. And that's when
Mhm.
my operators introduced me to that doctor. And it was so transformative for me, that first experience, that I hired her. She was my personal facilitator. I paid her $100,000 for full. It wasn't even full time. She had four clients. Each she would give one fourth of her time for the year, but I needed to really go deep and fix those things that weren't in alignment. And I remember, I had told her about that first experience of me facing that darkness and feeling that energetic connection with everyone.
Mhm.
And we were in another one of these journey experiences. She had picked a different strain of psilocybin to take me through a different experience with some different music, etc. And I'm in this state of hyper neuroplasticity again, and I actually hired her to go to lunch with each of my employees, my not all of them, but my close ones to me, my sons, family members, etc., so that she could find out what I needed to work on, right? So
And
she
they
she would
they
go.
were willing to tell it all. Sure.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
then I says, yeah, you figure out what I need to fix so that when I'm in that state again, you can work with me like you need to. And so this next one, I was sitting there, and in my living room I had these huge statues of Greek gods. I had Zeus and Poseidon, and they're like 3.5 feet tall. They were all beautiful bronze, and I had Atlas in the middle, and Atlas was holding the world on his shoulders. And I told her I was still in my ego self a little bit, and a lot, and I said, I feel a lot like Atlas. I've got at the time I had the company that I had founded had a few thousand employees, and I says, I feel like I have the world on my shoulders, with the charity work that I'm doing and the employees, but look how God made me so strong. The stomach muscles of my statue are strong, and she smiled and she said, Paul, I I honor that you're seeing some of those traits in those statues, but you know as well as I do that those were mythological gods. She said,
Right.
what about your relationship with him? And she points at the statue I had of Jesus in the room. And I'm in a full open hearted, open mind state. And I said, oh, I don't qualify for a relationship with him. And she said, well, why not? I said, well, with my parties and stuff, I don't keep all the commandments. I said, and when I left the church of my youth about 10 years before, and I said, my bishop told me that until I was rebaptized into that church, I wouldn't have the Spirit of God with me. And she said, well, do you really believe that? I said, well, no, I try to do good. I help in the charity work with the kids. And she said,
Mm.
why don't you work on that relationship for a minute? And so here I've got 6 grams of mushrooms. I can barely walk, but she
Right.
helps me take this statue down. And I sat on the beanbag for the next 2.5 hours, holding this statue and crying and rebuilding a relationship that I had lost 10 plus years before. So, in
Wow.
Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program, I think it's either 4 or 5 of those steps says you need to are God centered. It's not a specific religion, but you've got to acknowledge the presence of your creator
Right.
in this process of breaking free. The same thing with Addicts Anonymous. That is such an important part of it, and that's what was missing in my life. And the proper facilitator with the right music and the right atmosphere was able to bring that back in, where I now have a closer relationship with God than I've ever had my whole life. And so, anyway,
Right.
that's kind of a full circle of what I believe needs to
And
happen
you
to
trusted her then at this point.
you
She was
you
so
have you have to.
yeah.
If you don't trust your facilitator, sadly there are facilitators out there who and I trusted her because she came as a referral from the people I trusted the very most, meaning my
Okay.
undercover operators I had served with.
Right.
They were the ones that brought her in, and we had a lot of conversations before. But in that that hyper neuroplasticity state of being very impressionable, if your facilitator is not in integrity, some negative things can happen. It's so important to
Yeah.
have that.
I've heard a lot of people tell stories, about their shaman and this and that, and it was just them, and they did all these things. And me, I'm a survivor of a whole lot of things, and I always wanted to do it, but that's been my biggest fear. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't even know that person. How do
Yeah.
I trust them? But like you said, she
Well,
came through others that you trusted.
and,
So
and now we have, with our events, we have a 1-to-2 ratio. So we have 20 participants and 10 facilitators fully trained.
okay,
And in each situation, we had one recently where the this woman was dealing with some sexual trauma from her childhood, and in the process, some sexual energy was coming out. And we have a rule: if that's the case, there's always two facilitators with them. And it's in that case, because her addiction was sex with men, we had
right,
two female facilitators with her to help her through that, right?
okay,
I removed
right,
myself as a facilitator because I didn't want to have that energy be there. And so again, when you have 10 facilitators that can help people work through what they need to, then you can bring in the right person for the right job at the right time as we're helping
right.
people through their process.
Okay, love it. That's amazing.
So
Wow. I'm trying to look at the time here because I know your time is very limited.
yeah, we're about
Um,
an hour, so we probably have about 5-10 minutes left that we can answer
okay.
any questions that you have, and anything that you think that the audience might want to know.
So for me, and I bet, there are quite a few people that would want to know, even when you think of the Sound of Freedom, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, that's so terrible," and they related to that, and it sunk in, and the reality of what it could be. But I think so many people out there think that this is only happening overseas or out of the country. People don't realize that this could be going on with a neighbor, or it's so bad in the States that I don't think anyone's truly aware, or they don't want to be aware.
Absolutely.
So with what you've done, I mean, I'm sure you've seen all kinds of things. Like, how do we educate people more on the reality of what's going on right here, right in your backyard?
Well, it is important to understand that the children who are moved around, who are taken to another country, whatever else, that doesn't happen. Like, yes, there are cases like what you saw in Sound of Freedom, where kids are taken from a healthy home and put into a container and moved. That's not the norm.
Mhm.
The majority of children that are in that kind of situation come from broken homes or
Mhm.
runaways or a broken foster care program. There's a massive high percentage of children in the foster care program who go through sexual abuse or being sold, etc. But the
I was a
families,
foster kid.
yeah, I'm
So
sure
yeah, I
you
know.
saw
I
the
know.
darkness
Yeah.
for sure.
Right.
Now, for families that say, okay, well, my kids aren't at risk then because we have a mom and a dad at home. Well, what you need to understand is that there's a very high percentage of children who are being exploited and even sold for money for these kind of services, quote unquote, who
Mhm.
sleep in their own beds at night. Parents are like, "What? How does that happen?" We had for example, I was in one of the operations. There was this little girl. She was 13, just turned 13. Her babysitter was her aunt. Her aunt was showing her pornography. Her aunt was working with the traffickers. The mother had no idea. The aunt was got her doing some drugs and some things that she was like, okay, now we have our own little secrets that are only between us, and your mama doesn't know. And she
Right.
told this little girl, she says, you're going to lose your virginity anyway. You lose it to one of these guys, I'll pay you $500. And she was charging us $5,000. And this is how it starts. And then they control them through fear. There's in the United States, over a period of the last 5 years, there was an average, up until just the end of last year, there was an average of 130,000 children a year that were being brought in across the border unaccompanied minors. Now, the border wall should have never been a political issue. This is not a right or a left thing. This was a human trafficking
Right.
issue. And
Yes.
every single day from healthy families, I didn't say wealthy families, but healthy families throughout Latin America, children were being taken. And just like what you saw in Sound of Freedom, immediately upon being taken, these kids were being controlled through giving them drugs, uh,
Mhm.
controlled through fear. You don't you We know where your mother lives. We know where your sister goes to school. You don't want bad things to happen to them, do you? Okay, you'll do exactly
Right.
what we say. And this happens every day. That
Mm.
there was a little girl who was in New York who she was taken from Mexico City at 12 years old. She was sold 20 plus times a day until she was
Ugh.
17 years old when she escaped. And then they beat her up, brought her back into it. A little while later, she escaped again. Had seen a phone number of one of our sister foundations, called that, and we were able to get her out. And I remember this was years ago. We brought her over to our house for Christmas that year, and because she didn't have uh, family she could go back to at the time, and we asked her. I remember saying, I said, tell me this on the internet. At the time you had Backpage, you still have erotica.com. I mean, all these sites, right? I says the
Right.
girls that are in cities like New York, like Los Angeles, like Chicago, the girls who are online prostitutes who claim that they are independent, I said, what percentage of them really are independent? And I was thinking it was maybe half. She goes, oh no. She says, it's not half. She says at least 90 to 95% of those girls are being trafficked. The ones that say they're independent. She said they are being controlled. They'll give them drugs, they'll rape them, they'll control them through fear,
Right.
and she says they're being controlled. So guys, if you think, oh, this is a victimless crime, I'm just going to this city, I'm doing these things, but this is an
Mhm.
adult girl. No, chances are you're contributing to human trafficking,
Right.
even pornography. And I'm going to go there for a second, guys.
Yep.
So just most people who are watching this have seen pornography at some time in their life. That doesn't mean you're going to become a pedophile.
Right.
However, there's pornography acts like a hardcore drug, harder than even cocaine for some guys, right? And
Mhm.
just like a hard drug, some guys need something harder to have that same fix. And for some of them,
Yeah.
harder is more bondage things or other type. For some of them, harder is a little bit younger, etc. And that's what leads them down this road. And people are like, oh well, yeah, I'm not addicted. Oh yeah, give it up for a year and tell me you're not addicted, dude. Right? Chances are it
Right.
started out
Right.
with something softer, right? You were looking at the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, and then it went to the Victoria's Secret lingerie stuff, and then it went to booby pictures, and then it went to videos, and then it went to yes, there's a progression. The very
Right.
second, the very second that you take a woman from the divine feminine to an object, you start going down that dark road. And it's so important
Mhm.
to get a handle on that, to fix it immediate. If you need to, go do a ketamine thing, go to South America with us and do a journey experience, whatever it is, fix it. Somehow find those tools
Yes.
to release those things that are not in alignment with the best version of you.
Right.
So that's
Whew.
all I have to say
Yeah.
about that.
So, I don't feel bad that I've always been the way overprotective mom, grandma, like, never spending the night at anyone's houses, all the things. This is exactly why.
Exactly.
Um,
Well, and we don't have to
so
be a
with your book
helicopter mom. We don't have to be a helicopter mom,
right,
but we do need to be aware.
aware and
Yep, and we do need to make sure our kids know what's appropriate, what's not, and
yes.
you need to be their 911. That's so important.
Yeah, I was just
So
gonna say it's always goes back to, like, what you said in the beginning, the relationship. The relationship with their parents, it has to be strong, it has to be a good one where they feel comfortable.
exactly. So you were going
So,
to ask?
wrapping up, I was gonna ask you, like, with your book, so I know plenty of people have seen Sound of Freedom, the movie. What do you dive into more? I just got your PDF last night, so I'm so excited to read it. But what can you tell people to, like, draw them in some to what are they gonna find out? What are they gonna learn from the book compared to
Oh,
Sound of Freedom?
so much. Well,
The
the
movie.
movie just created, yeah, the movie just created awareness. That's all. Um,
Okay, okay,
there's not a lot of tools there to keep your kids safe. So the first part of the Sound of Freedom book is the making of an undercover operators, which talks about our situational awareness training and hand-to-hand combat training and even creating success in your financial career so that you can make an impact in the world, et cetera. So that I discuss all of that in the very beginning. Then I go through the details of the rescue on the island and the Haiti stuff, the
okay.
doctors in the jungle, a lot of different things of different experiences I had, and the and I take the reader
Wow,
through
okay,
that transformational experience of that darkness into the light. And it's such a beautiful light at the end of the tunnel that it is really transformative. Then the whole last section, the last I think 4 or 5 chapters, is all about liberating humanity. What does that look like? How do we heal from this? What does generational
okay.
trauma look like, and how do we stop that before it hits that next generation? How do we identify those
Right,
signs in our kids so that we can give them the help that they need before it ever turns into something worse? So
right.
that's really all the solution stuff is all the last 5 or 6 chapters of the book. So
Oh my
excited to
gosh, I
share
love
that with
it.
the
I
world.
can't wait. Yes, can't wait to read it. And you made a good point with generational trauma too. I know that that's very real. Some people would be like, "Oh, that's hokey." No, that's something I'm working on right now too because I come from a
Yeah.
long line of generational trauma and I've just started working on it. So, it's very real and it's definitely
Well, God,
something to address.
God bless you for breaking that chain. That's what it's all about. You healed from the stuff
Mhm.
you need to heal from, and now you're healing others, and so that your kids, your grandchildren, don't ever have to go through what you went through. And that takes a very strong woman to do that. So I honor you for that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we'll just make sure I mean, we're definitely gonna make sure that we put all your links in there. McKenna will make sure that they're all in the description, for the movie, for your book, for your you have multiple foundations, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Child Liberation Foundation, yeah, you can go to childliberation.org. Child Liberation Foundation is the main foundation that funds a lot of the other foundations that we support.
Okay. Okay. I'm excited for everybody to have this information and to listen to your expertise and the things you wow, the things you've done, the things you've went through. I could sit here and talk to you for like 8 hours and ask you 1,000 questions.
I
Okay,
did
is
a
there any
4.5 hour podcast once. Yeah, I
you
did a four and a half
did?
hour one. Yeah, I was talking forever on it, but yeah, I would talk longer today if I didn't sadly have another one in another 15, 20 minutes. So,
Okay,
but
well, we might just have to do another one,
I
Paul. I
wouldn't mind.
mean, you have you're a wealth of information. All
Well,
right, well,
I'm
thank you.
super grateful.
I am so honored, and have a
Thank you
good
for
time on your
having me.
next one.
I will. Thank
Yes,
you so
thank
much for
you.
having me on your show.